And Gertrude Stein, probably considered the grande dame of the Lost Generation, she came from Allegheny, Pennsylvania, but was raised in California in Europe and moved to Paris early in 1903 when she was 29. With her brother Leo, they established a home at 27 Rue de Fleurus, which became a very famous salon devoted to writing and the modern arts. Hemingway, Sherwood Anderson, and others came to her for guidance. They were in awe of what was, in essence, the literary equivalent of the momentous innovations being carried out by Matisse and Picasso. A drastically simplified syntax and diction, designed to liberate writing from the dead weight of traditional literary language. She conveyed emotion through repetition of keywords, rhythms, or sounds, like in her famous line, "A rose is a rose is a rose." Hemingway, with his drive and discipline, used her ideas to great effect. She did famously state that the only geniuses she had ever known were God, Picasso, and herself. Lot 154 is a first edition of Geography and Plays, and it's her initial collection of experimental landscape portraits and theater pieces, and displays her attempt to liberate language from the accepted rules of composition. Lot 157 is the first French edition of her book, Picasso. It's inscribed and signed by her as well. Her patronage, friendship, and support were of major importance for Picasso. His portrait of her is among his most famous. It was begun in 1905, which was a pivotal time between his Harlequin and Cubist periods. She sat for him over 90 times, and he said at the end he couldn't see her face anymore when he looked, so he just left it. When he completed the picture in 1906, a year later, he used a mask-like heaviness for her face, inspired by Iberian, African, and Roman sculpture, and it really foreshadows his adoption of Cubism. Someone commented at the time that Stein did not resemble her portrait, and Picasso's famous reply was, "She will." Lot 19 is an inscribed and signed first edition of Malcolm Cowley's Blue Juniata. It's the future literary historian and critic's first publication. It's a collection of verse describing his expatriate experiences in France. The book serves as an important indicator of attitudes of that post-war generation, as does Lot 21, his book, The Dry Season. It's in a very similar vein. This copy of The Dry Season is poignantly inscribed to American literary critic Van Wyck Brooks at the start of World War II. Brooks later called Cowley's great work Exile's Return, which is featured here as Lot 23, an irreplaceable literary record of the most dramatic period in American literary history. Another writer for whom the war was a huge influence was John Dos Passos. Born in Chicago, he went to Paris after graduating from Harvard and joined the United States Medical Corps. His first novel is here, Lot 39, called One Man's Initiation, and draws on his experiences during World War I as a member of the French ambulance service. We also have a first edition of The Garbage Man, Lot 37, which is an experimental play attacking social oppression. Robert McAlmon was sort of the spokesman of the post-war nihilistic pessimism of the lost generation. He had his own publishing house called Contact Publishing. He then migrated to Paris, befriended many of the young writers, and was really a pioneer for early writing in Paris. Lot 137 is a copy of a companion volume which he published in Paris under his own house in 1923, and it's inscribed and signed to his good friend John Buffy Glasgow, who was in McAlmon's literary circle in Paris. Another writer who spent a lot of time in Paris in the 20s was Glenway Wescott. He was a Wisconsin author known for his writing about his native region, but he lived in Paris for much of his early career. Lot 168 is the first London edition of his first book, Apple of the Eye. It deals with reflections on the rural Wisconsin of his childhood, in a story about a boy from the frontier West who wrestles with the repressed Puritanism of his aunt against a more sensual appreciation of life taught him by a friend. Lot 168 is particularly interesting in that it's inscribed to Isadora Duncan, the great dancer. With my affectionate best wishes and profound admiration, Glenway, Nice, summer of 1926. Lot 178 is a first edition of The Grandmothers, Wescott's best-known work about a multi-generational portrait of rural Wisconsin family, sort of a classic depiction of American themes, the soul of American pioneer community and its descendants. This lot 178 is a particularly nice copy. It's the first limited edition inscribed to his sister-in-law, Barbara Harrison, who was a publisher. Another work Wescott inscribed to Harrison is Lot 183, The Pilgrim Hawk. It was his first work of fiction in 10 years. It describes his memories of Paris, and it's set in a Paris suburb during the 1920s. It concerns 3 couples linked by 3 different kinds of love. Lot 181 is a first edition of Like a Lover. What makes this appealing is that it's inscribed and initialed by Wescott to the famous singer Paul Robeson and his wife Islanda. Edmund Wilson, who was originally from New Jersey, was also a Princeton graduate like F. Scott Fitzgerald. He was also in the service in Europe during World War I and began a prolific writing career that made him the leading man of letters in various genres, but he's best known as a literary critic. He was the editor of Vanity Fair, The New Republic, and The New Yorker. Lot 203 is a lovely first edition of his novel, I Thought of Daisy. It's his first published solo book and is a satirical look at New York's bohemian literary circle. The sale contains several lots about Paris, concerning lifestyle, authors' memoirs. One interesting lot is 129, Transition Stories. This is a collection of the best stories from the famous avant-garde journal, which became the mouthpiece of the era. It was published at the end of its first year, 1929. It's inscribed and signed by the editors Eugene and Maria Jolas and Robert Sage, and it contains an autographed letter signed by the author Kay Boyle. Lot 13 is a group of 3 different editions by the Canadian author Morley Callahan, That Summer in Paris, memoirs of tangled friendships with Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and some others. Callahan was from Toronto, and it was there that he actually met Hemingway, who was an early champion of his work, and Morley eventually went to Paris to write and to do some reporting, and he met up with Hemingway at that time. Lot 111 is a complete run of the journal called the Lost Generation Journal. It was published in the 70s, but it was an excellent review of the time and featured works Hemingway and female writers at the time, and covered other writers like Pound, Dos Passos, Callahan, Cowley, and others. Lot 30 is our cover lot. It's a book by Buffy Glasgow entitled Memoirs of Montparnasse. We chose it for the cover because of its colorful image of crowded cafe scene lit by the evening glow that really symbolizes Paris in the 20s. This particular copy is a first edition owned by Malcolm Cowley and actually contains 6 pages of pencil corrections in his hand. For those collecting works relating to the authors of the Lost Generation from their time in Paris through the rest of their long and prolific careers, the sale will offer much of interest, and we hope you'll come to Swann Galleries, view the material, and if not, you can always view the catalog in full on our website.